So now I'm going to engage that mod. There is no way you can get those sounds out of this amp normally. The amp is just not capable of that sound. Today I'm going to show you how to easily add an extra channel to your amp, and it doesn't really matter what sort of amp you have, this will still work. Now this concept is pretty basic and it's used by loads of different amp manufacturers to add an extra channel or even a separate mode, but the way I'm implementing it today is pretty unique. In the amp world, I haven't seen it done quite like this before. I mean, no doubt it has, but I'm pulling apart amps every single day as part of my job and I just haven't seen it done like this. But I have seen it done like this in the effects pedal realm. So when I start to get into this mod, some of you more experienced people that work on amplifiers are probably going to think you know where it's going, but just sit tight, watch this video, because I am pretty sure this is something you've never tried before. The Marshall Silver Jubilee is regarded as one of Marshall's greatest ever amps, and it's got loads of famous users from Slash to Joe Bonamassa. But what a lot of people don't know is the famous lead channel on that amp is actually not 100% tube. It's a blend of tube and solid state distortion. In a crude kind of way, it's like there's a little effects pedal that's always on in the lead channel of that amp. Now, Marshall use this idea across quite a lot of their amps, but the Jubilee sounds particularly nice, and one of those reasons, I mean, there's a lot of reasons why it does sound nice, but one of them is the particular combination of parts they use in that solid state distortion section. One thing I've found with a lot of amps designed this way, at low volume, they can kind of have this bees in a can sort of distortion sound. But I've found a way of implementing these same parts in a little bit of a different way that I feel gives a way more natural result. I bet many of you have worked it out by now. We're going to be using diodes, but not how you think. We're going to be using it in the negative feedback loop of one of those preamp tube stages instead of the usual hard clipping to ground. Now this creates what I feel is a way more natural sounding overdrive and distortion, especially at small club volumes or even at bedroom volumes. Okay, so here's a schematic of a Marshall Silver Jubilee. Now, if you look through here, you've got the input. You're going through the first stage here, and then this is the lead channel up here through this stage into the lead channel, and here is that solid state circuitry. You can see you've got a couple of LEDs, and then you've got three 1N4007 diodes. Okay, and you can see your signal comes up here and then it gets clipped through these diodes, which are going to ground, through here, and then into a master volume there. Now you do have this little extra stage. Now that is going to bump up the gain or push the amount of drive into these diodes to sort of compensate for things like volume loss and stuff like that. But today we're just going to use this little section here. We're not going to do this little join in here. I have tried it with this join with and without, and to me it sounds exactly the same. I actually don't really think that's doing anything, so we're just going to leave that out. So today I'm going to be modifying my Jet City JCA20. Now you can modify whatever amp that you've got, you just need to grab the schematic. Now I'm going to be using that same diode combination as in the Marshall Jubilee, just because I really like how it sounds. I've tried different combinations of Zener diodes and LEDs and different types of clipping diodes, and I just generally keep coming back to that same type of configuration, maybe modified a little bit, but pretty much that configuration is my go-to because it just sounds, and more importantly, it feels really, really good. What you need to do is find your schematic, then you need to find your gain control. If your amp has got one, and most of them will have a gain control of some kind or some sort of control. Sometimes in a non-master volume amp, the volume is the gain control, right? So once you've gone through this stage, you want to find that next stage, and that is this one here, and that's the one I'm going to target for this mod. Now, it might be a little different to you depending on the way your amp's configured, but instead of the usual, this is how it would usually be implemented. So normally, the diodes and all the associated circuitry would just be going to ground like that from somewhere like there, right? But we're not going to do that. What I'm going to do is we're going to put, that's all the diodes and circuitry, we're going to put it in here. So it's going to go in the feedback loop. So it's going to go in that loop there, in the negative feedback loop of this particular preamp tube. Generally, you're going to want this before you get to the EQ stage because it's nice to be able to EQ it after it gets clipped. I just think it sounds a lot more natural if you've got the power to do it there. In some cases, it doesn't work and you have to put it after the EQ stage. Just depends where this is situated inside your amp. But the cool thing is you can experiment. Now, one thing I'd really like to note here is we are dealing directly with high voltage. So at this point here, there will be quite a lot of voltage between sort of 200 and 400 volts, depending on your amp design. Please be careful. Please watch my video on how to work on tube amps safely. It's called How Not to Die when working on tube amps. Definitely go and check that out if you haven't, because you'd want to make sure you've discharged all your capacitors, check your voltages, because we're going to be soldering to this exact point here where there are some deadly voltages. Okay, let's go through the parts we're going to need today. Now, before we do that, just so you know, over at my fourth wall page, I've got an extra video with a whole bunch of mods and cool little extra bits and pieces like that for our Plus members over there. But today we are going to use an 100 nanofarad capacitor. So the next is going to be a single pole, single throw switch. You could use a different type of switching configuration if you want. Then we've got a couple of LEDs, red LEDs. Then I've got 3 of these 1N4007 diodes. What we're going to do now is we'll take this over to the soldering iron. We're going to solder together this sort of clipping cocktail, and then we'll get it inside the amp. First things first, grab your LED and bend these 2 legs out. So the longer leg is the positive leg, or the anode, and the shorter leg is the negative one, or the cathode. That's how I think of them anyway. They're also on the LED, there's a flat spot on the side of the LED. That's always the cathode side. So I'm going to pop it into here. Now we want to join these all together to make it look exactly like that schematic. So I like to use my little hands here, my little helping hands. It's really difficult without these sort of things. But they have to be going, each sort of grouping has to be going in the same direction, or else it will not work. So this one's going to be going this way. And you just sort of get the little legs side by side. Then solder it together. How's that looking? Pretty cool. Then next, I always grab my multimeter and just quickly check it, just with diode, on diode mode. There we go. Okay, so that one is ready to go. That's one side of it. One side is just a single LED and one of these diodes together. So let's do the other side. Same again, grab your diode, stretch out the legs. I always try and do it the same way so it's not confusing. One down. I kind of really want them to line up pretty much side by side. Give a really nice join. That's the next one done, so let's have a look. I'll just take this leg off so it's not shorting out. There we go, LED comes on, so that's good. It's ready to go. I hope you can see that on camera, the LED coming on. So that means they are now wired up correctly. So the next step is wiring them opposite directions like this. I'm going to probably heat shrink these and then make sort of one sort of heat shrink package. I'll show you what I mean. Right, I just want to be super clear how this little package is connected up. So you've got your diode and you can sort of see it's got its little gray band around one end. So that is the cathode side of that diode. So you've got the anode on this side and cathode, and you try and think of it, things flowing through it in one direction, right? So we're going to be joining these up, anode to cathode, like this. So this one will join to this one like this, and then you've got your LED. Now the anode on it is the longer leg, or the positive leg, because remember LEDs are just diodes, they're light emitting diodes. That's why it's called an LED. So that's the anode and that's the cathode on that side. So when I stretch it out, it connects like that to those ones. So that's all going one direction, anode, cathode, anode, cathode, anode, cathode. They're going to be all soldered together. And on the other side, they're going the opposite direction. See, I'm pointing this one back this way. Same sort of thing, we'll stretch that out again, and that'll be soldered together like that. So anode, cathode, anode, cathode. And then they'll be twisted at the ends, joined at the ends. You definitely don't want it to join anywhere in the middle there. So this capacitor joins to just one side of that diode package, and from the capacitor it goes to that plate, so the high voltage. The other side will go to the grid of that tube, which I think is pin number 7. So I wanted to make that really clear before going on about how things are connected, just in case you haven't used diodes or had a lot to do with diodes. Okay, so I have heat shrunk one of those little groups of diodes and not the other side, and I've sort of twisted them together like this. This is where we're at the moment. So I mean, there's probably a whole bunch of ways that you could lay this out. I was sort of toying up whether just to keep the legs on the LED straight down, but this is what I've come up with for now anyway. If I was doing this mod on the daily, I'd probably come up with a different way. So next you've got your 100 nanofarad capacitor. Now remember, these diodes groups have to be running all in one direction, so each group, the diodes anode to cathode, and same back, going back the other way. So the sort of back-to-back groups, there's 3 going one way and 2 going the other, just like in that schematic. The only thing I don't do is do that little join where the LEDs are. I've just found that does absolutely nothing, so I've never found any benefit to having that join. I'm going to put this one in here. I'm going to sort of put it in there, and I'm going to twist it onto this leg here at the end. So you can kind of see what I've done here. I've joined one end to that capacitor, so that's going to be the DC blocking capacitor that's going to stop the high voltage getting to these diodes. It'll just literally insta-fry them. And that's going back out the same way. So next we're just going to attach wires to those ends. Now you're going to want something that can handle 600 volts, some decent sort of wire. I've got some stuff that I really like to use that works extremely well, but you definitely want something that's fairly heavy duty or rated for at least 600 volts. So that is the next step, so I'll get that wire on there now. Right, so this is where we're at now. So I've put those wires on. The red one is obviously going to be going to the high voltage, and the black one will be going to the switch. I've added heat shrink to any of the exposed points. Now I'm just going to heat shrink the whole thing in one big piece of heat shrink. So let's do that. But that's pretty much what you're after. You're kind of after like a sort of a little parcel like this. So that's our clipper. So let's get it inside the amp. Okay, so I've got this installed in here now. This is our little cocktail of capacitors that I've installed in there now, and our little switch. And it just connects those 2 wires together when switched down. Now in the schematic, let me grab it over here. Okay, so I had to join these wires. One wire had to go from pin 7 of that tube. So this one here, this is pin 7 of that tube. So if I go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 there, and the other side had to get joined to pin 2. Now pin 2 was the dangerous one. That was the one going to the plate of that tube. So that had the high voltage. So that's my red wire there. So that hits that capacitor first, then goes to those diodes, then to the switch. Then when switched on, it joins it back to the grid, pin 7. And that is all there is to it. So what I've put in here is an adhesive backed cable tie mount, and I've just cable tied our little cocktail there onto that, and then just wired it to the switch here, and it's actually really, really firm and secure. The funny thing is, I was testing it before, so I know it works, but I ended up just jamming on it, and half an hour flew by, because this thing sounds freaking awesome, man. Like, I am really impressed with the sound of this mod, and I've put it in a few different amps now, not loads of amps, but I have actually installed it in a few different amps, even I think it was a Fender Deluxe. It worked really, really well on that too. So anyway, let's get this all up to the studio now and plug it in, and I'll just give a quick run through and we'll have a jam and see what it sounds like. So obviously I'm going to show you what it sounds like along with the gain range of this mod. Now bear in mind there's a bit of a volume drop when you engage this mod, and that's because we are trading some raw volume to make this all happen. I'm going to try and keep those levels as even as possible throughout this demo, so just so you can hear the difference. Okay, so this is with the gain wound up on this particular Jet CDJCA 20, and this is what it sounds like. So now I'm going to engage that mod. There is no way you can get those sounds out of this amp normally. The amp is just not capable of that sound. Let's just try for some low gain sounds. This is what it would normally sound like at the gain. So the gain's lower now on about half. Still sounds really nice. But if I turn that mod on, That is a cool sound. Like, I'm not religious at all, but that song is such a banger. So this is at full gain now. So this is what the amp would normally sound like at full gain, which is pretty gainy. Like, decent amount of gain. Still really good note separation here as well. It's a great mod. It really just sort of adds like an extra level to your amp, I suppose. Like a lot of my videos, I want this to be more about the concept than the actual mod itself. I think this mod would be a great building block if you're designing your own amplifier. It just sounds a lot better than diodes to ground, which I've never been a really big fan of until you get those amps really pumping and you're getting into some of that power tube saturation. And unfortunately, without an attenuator, it's just too loud for a lot of situations. I hope you guys install this mod. Please let me know in the comments if you do, and have a great week.